Hello everyone, Steven here. Thank you for joining me today for another episode of the R Blank Right for Your Tank series. Today we will discuss one of the more mysterious corals in the hobby, the Goniopora, or flower pot coral. Before we begin, if you enjoy reefing contents like this, please help support me by liking, commenting, and subscribing. So the Goniopora is a large polyp stony coral that has been in the hobby for many years. I recall seeing them arriving in the local fish store that I worked at the time, from time to time. They weren't very frequent, and they were pretty boring actually, just like one or two different colors. However, until recent years, this coral possesses the reputation of being one of the more difficult corals to maintain. Obviously, there are success stories no matter what kind of coral it is, but in general, the general community has struggled to keep Goniopora happy for a very long time. Please comment below if you were one of the Goniopora pioneers and have had success from early on. What did you do that you think was right, and what was your pro tips for everyone else? I suspect a lot of the recent success in the coral is tied to their availability from captive grown sources. I do not have evidence to support my theory, but it does seem that as of late, most of the Goniopora offered in the retail are tank grown and frag versus a lot of the wild harvested predecessors that we used to take. This is the only data point that leads me to suspect that the tie between a recent success and also the captive grown. And I suppose similarly, a lot of other corals also have enjoyed recent success when they're either captive grown or when fisheries have been able to find new locations. The elegance coral is one example. I have always loved them. I think they're one of the most beautiful corals, but for years everybody struggled to keep them. Turns out there's some kind of mysterious disease that comes with a lot of them. And recently, the ones that are from Australia seem to be pretty hardy. And I wonder if that's the same story with Goniopora, that at some point maybe somebody found a gold mine with really healthy specimens that they were able to then keep and grow in captivity and then start fragging them. Now, what makes keeping them so tricky, aside from potential disease? My personal experience is that aside from the perfect reef water parameters, I have found that the Goniopora in my tank does best when it is moved to the lower level of the tank with subdued lighting. I don't really think the strength of flow is a key factor, but I will caveat that weaker flow in general is a no-no for LPS corals because the detritus can really build up and drown them. And when I have the most success with them is when I target feed them heavily. I'm currently in the process of testing out a couple new products as far as coral food, and I will actually produce an episode to dive deep into the coral feeding habit or practice that there's a lot of debate out there. I personally have success. I am a firm believer of coral feeding right now, but until the new food arrived, I have had great success with Reefroid, and I found that my Goniopora coral really pops up and gains lots of growth as I increase the feeding cadence. So, are they right for your tank? Well, here's a couple factors to consider. 1. I'd ask yourself, do you have enough space for it to stretch its arms without touching other corals? The tricky thing about LPS is their polyps can sometimes shrink and look very innocent, but the very same polyp can also suddenly stretch across the tank and zap another coral in a matter of days. I suggest at least 3 to 4 inches of space, 3 to 4 inch radius. Actually, depends on your colony size, up to 6 to 8 inch radius of clear space between the Goniopora and your next coral. And the other thing is, based on my personal experience, ask yourself, do you have a high nutrient tank to supply the Goniopora with quote dirty unquote water for feeding? If not, will you be able to commit to target feeding this coral several times a week? I ask these questions because those are based on my personal success. I think these two are more important deciding factors for today's tank-grown Goniopora corals. As long as you have these two covered, you can work around and move the coral around in your tank until you find the optimal lighting and flow. Every coral is different. Every coral of the same species can also be different if they're of different color, different size, different origin. So I'm not here to tell you where to place it, what kind of lighting to put it under. The most important thing is, hey, you need to have perfect water parameters. 2, make sure that the coral is not touching other coral. And number 3, make sure you feed it a lot. You just have to test things out and feel the vibe with them. Just note, they typically stay deflated for a day or 2 after rehoming. So don't worry too much if you have just purchased a new one and you don't see it popped up like the one you see in the picture or like how it does in the store. It's a little shy, but should regain the confidence after about day 2. Now if they remain deflated after day 3, then you have reasons to worry. I suggest you do some water testing, and then probably another good practice, what I always do is when I purchase a new coral, if it's a retail store or even if it's an online store, I always reach out to the store owner or the people who take care of the coral and ask you questions. Hey, what kind of salinity you keep in your corals right now? So that I can either try to match it or I can try to slowly acclimate my coral to whatever salinity that I have that's different from yours. And number 2, what's your placement right now? What kind of lighting and how often you feed them? If the breeder or the seller is having success with the coral using whatever method they're using right now, it's probably always a good idea to adopt that same method to care for this very same coral. Have you had this coral before? Have you ever encountered specific issues with them, and were you able to overcome? And how large is your current colony? Show off your coral and share them with us in the comments below. We'd love to see them. Cheers!